Okay, so now we get to talk about commitment and action, which is the last piece. This is where we kind of are going to come into really. It's interesting, actually, because I think that as we've moved through these pieces, when we come to the piece of commitment and action, and we're actually thinking about pluralism, we're actually thinking about multi-ethnic and multiracial identities being part of our Jewish narrative and elevating the ones that have been impacted by marginalization. We're also saying, and we're also naming in a powerful way, the idea that it is when we have support systems for ourselves around these particular places of edges or pain or challenge, that when we are sitting in circle and we are trusting each other enough with dignity and respect, trusting each other enough to be sacred witnesses to the ways our identities have been impacted, especially when it's specifically talking about racism or racial identity and ethnic identity, to build community is to say that we're going to take the time to have these conversations, to examine and reflect on who we are, and to reflect on the impact that we have on one another. It is to realize that we want to shift our village. We want to examine the way we've been told that it's supposed to look or should look. And we become part of what changes the landscape and the ecology of, our Jewishness in this generation and in this time. And to do that, you must first begin with your personal commitment to creating space in yourself for others to have different expressions than what you have grown up with. And I often talk about the village like a bubble. And there's an image in the PowerPoint that has it's a stick figure, and then it has a little village behind them. And what I want to convey is that we all come with the village, and that to try to silence that which is not familiar is possibly one of the most painful things to do in our own communities. So how do we build? We build by doing exactly what we've done in this workshop, by evaluating our own relationship, by understanding the construct in this country that has decided that certain people and certain groups will not have access, by also being able to recontextualize the Jewishness that we grew up with or may not have grown up with, and expand that to living and seeing before yourself, wow, this is what a Jew looks like. This is what a Jew looks like. This is what a Jew looks like. It's all the places and the people that show up in the space, and we honor that. And in this particular aspect, context of pluralism and ethnic multiplicity, it is important that we centralize those living at so many intersections, and also their ethnic identity is constantly dismissed. So what do? We create spaces where we share the story. We know how to be silent when we don't identify and we don't understand. The objective is not to understand. The objective is to learn to embody creating a space for each other. It is not to make another person a Jew like you. We're good with one of you, and we need all the different threads that create the tapestry of our collective Jewishness. When communities, even in the context of communities of color or communities of disability, when we start to turn on ourselves, when we begin to create harm, to isolate, to the way we handle that is sort of like we turn in on each other and we begin to use the same the same metric of supremacy within our own groups. Oh, well, you have the right, you don't have the right, this doesn't have the right, that has the right, you may not, this is what's more important. We need to begin to evaluate what it means to show up and not need to create a supremacy, because that has been internalized as a form of survival for those who actually don't fit into the, cis-normative, heteronormative, patriarchal, white supremacy colonial construct. Yes, that's really long, but it holds so much, right? What we want to be able to do is really begin to examine and reflect the way we need to do away with that particular trauma reaction. And that's where trauma epigenetics, which is how trauma travels through our DNA, becomes important as a conversation. There's studies, you can look them up yourself, even books written on generations after the Holocaust and the impact on the nervous system. You can do all those things. And even with all your studying, please know that you must do the work of embodying what you're learning and integrating. And that means being willing to ask yourself questions about you and your environment. That means being willing to be radically humble and also radically self-reflective in what does it give you. If you are a person who has benefited from the racialization in America, what has that given you, or what has it given your family? Right? Have you been able to live almost fill in the blank? Because it's never really, we never really get to live under the radar, right? And so it's like, what happens? What does it mean to you? And why is it that Jewishness can only exist if it's contracted into this particular look or aesthetic? So once you're in that motion and you're reflecting and you're showing up, this is where your commitment and your action come fully embodied. When you're creating collective space or communal space and you're doing organizing, the guidelines or the anchors of how you organize become the place that we can turn to again and again as the commitments that have been verbalized, that have been written, that have been named, as these are the ways that this is what we're acknowledging. We're acknowledging the pain, we're acknowledging the trauma, we're acknowledging the challenge, and we're also acknowledging our commitment to work through those things, to name it. We are no longer doing living into this idea of, I don't want anybody to be uncomfortable. That is the most, I still try to figure out, where did we get that metric from? This is not a comfortable conversation. None of them are, when we're talking about oppression, when we're talking about life loss, when we're talking about quality of life. None of it. So it becomes important to be able to do that examination, to create the commitments that are going to say that we have a way of being with each other, even in the intensity, that we seek less to understand and more to believe when someone is telling us that they're having an experience or are being impacted by racism within our own community because of the construct. So the way that we build the pluralism is by not just doing something based on a theory. I will not give you theory, although we're using a framework, right, of decolonization. It's because we come from different places. We may have been born here, some of us, but we have a lot of narrative that comes from other cultures. And so it's important for us to be able to bring that into the space. And so the way I may lead something is different than the way you may lead it. But we both look to the guidelines used to create the space in order to really integrate the teaching or what's available to us, right? So in your organizing, the way you carry yourself and hold yourself and your own complexity will only infuse the way you hold community. So the idea that we need to subscribe to something outside or do something outside and we don't get to be accountable, it's like we're taking that, we're tossing it in the trash, right? It's like no more. Our accountability lies in the idea that we're willing to also name the places where we may never understand that experience, or we don't have that as an experience in terms of a ritual, a tradition, a way of being. And so we're not going to be the folks who are going to police that, because we understand that policing is a construct of this particular white supremacist culture in America. So we are no longer subscribing to that. So you get to watch yourself, and as you engage in space, you get to also offer up to the space others showing up in their full selves, and you not needing to qualify, quantify, or verify their experience, but that it is enough that we're naming that in our own communities, we have been isolating each other based on whose tradition is this, or whose belief is this, or what's this, or who's the real deal, or the purist. No such thing exists. No such thing exists. We've been to many lands. Again, we are many people, which is the beautiful thing that we get to tap into as we show up for collective change and justice work. It's all these things that we know of, both at a very cognitive place and both at a cellular level, that helps us fight for justice, that creates justice as a core Jewish ethic and embodiment. Because we know what it is in our lineage to go to different lands, to be expelled, to be displaced, to be harmed. There's so many things we know. And that's what learning about our narrative does. And our multiplicitous narratives, not just Ashkenazi narrative, not just Moroccan, not just European, Moroccan, African, Spaniard, it's all the things. It's all the narratives that make us a strong community. So, ask questions, self-reflect, integrate, be willing to look foolish, silly, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't feel good. Luckily, we don't need to look like we know. What we need as community is to be with each other with spaciousness, generosity, humility, and a fierce devotion to justice and equity. So, as a close to this particular piece, you shared in the group different words, and I'm going to get them so that we can put them together. But what I'd love to do with that is to also create kind of a midrash in the shape of a poem. This is what it looks like to be pluralistic. And I'm going to grab all your words and create an offering and a commitment. And if you are willing to, I'd love to witness your commitment to this work. What's your commitment to a pluralistic, multi-ethnic, and multiracial Jewish community? What are you willing to be in the space with? And what is your commitment? For some, that may be reflection. For some, that may be learning more. We need to know what you're committed to so we know where you are at as we're organizing and creating change. And we don't have to look back and go, wait, where did that person go? I thought they were committed. It is important to name your commitment to justice, equity, and pluralism. And that begins by your internal, reflection and introspection about where you see yourself in this dynamic. And again, it's not comparable or comparative. This is not about whose trauma wound is most profound. If you have not gotten attention and support for the places where you have been deeply wounded at any intersection of identity, please get the support you need. Please. There are ways in which we are deeply challenged in our organizing by pain that has not been witnessed or supported. And things can get incredibly messy in that way. And what I desire for us is to be able to move in a way that's personal, interpersonal, and communal, so that we can continue to shift the way the village can hold for all of us. Thank you again for the honor of being in space with you. And again, the part of this video that you are to kind of do something with is name your commitment to a pluralistic, multi-ethnic, and multiracial Jewish community. What is your commitment? Share that with your coaches, share it with each other, share it with the community at large in your cohort, so that you're with each other and you know where you stand and where you may need support. So that is all I have to say, which has been a lot. Thank you so much for the honor of being in space with you. I wish you courage and boldness, rest, refreshment, and support, because we are family. Adios.